Once the Blessed One was dwelling in Rajagriha at Vulture Peak Mountain, together with a great gathering of the Sangha of monks and a great gathering of the Sangha of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Blessed One entered the Samadhi that expresses the Dharma called profound illumination. And at the same time, noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, while practicing the profound Prajnaparamita, saw in this way. He saw the 5 skandhas to be empty of nature. Then, through the power of the Venerable Shariputra, said to noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, how should a son or daughter of noble train who wishes to practice the profound Prajnaparamita? Addressed in this way, noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, said to Venerable Shariputra, O Shariputra, a son or daughter of noble family who wishes to practice the profound Prajnaparamita should see in this way. Seeing the 5 skandhas to be empty of nature. Form is emptiness, emptiness also is form. Emptiness is no other than form, form is no other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, perception, formation, and consciousness are emptiness. Thus, Shariputra, all dharmas are emptiness. There are no characteristics. There is no birth and no cessation. There is no impurity and no purity. There is no decrease and no increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no perception, no formation, no consciousness. No eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch. Dharmas, no I dhatu up to no mind dhatu, no dhatu of dharmas, no mind consciousness dhatu, no ignorance, no end of ignorance up to no old age and death, no end of old age and death. No suffering, no origin of suffering, no cessation of suffering, no path, no wisdom, no and no non-attainment. Therefore, the bodhisattvas have no attainment except 5 Prajnaparamita. Since there is no obscuration of mind, there is no fear. They transcend falsity and attain complete nirvana. All the Buddhas of the 3 times by means of Prajnaparamita fully awaken to unsurpassable, true, complete enlightenment. Therefore, the great mantra of Prajnaparamita, the mantra of great insight, the unsurpassed mantra, the unequaled mantra, the mantra that calms all suffering should be known as true since there is no deception. Prajnaparamita mantra is said in this way. Te Atta Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasangate Bodhisoha. Thus Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound Prajnaparamita. And the Blessed One arose from that samadhi and praised noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, saying, Good, good, O son of noble family, thus it is, O son of noble family, thus it is. One should practice the profound Prajnaparamita just as you have taught, and all the Tathagatas will rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, Venerable Shariputra and noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, that whole assembly in the world with its gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas rejoiced and praised the words of the Blessed One. Jume ne cho tampa ne ngushe du chu nga yi du do jen ru ba bo la ma yi bu yin zi ne zo ngan ro zo la ja ze lo. Chandra Samarayambe Te Atta Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasangati Bodhisoha Baba Gonju Zonji Gai Demi Doji She Roba Doji Miba Doji Shiva Doji Jagi Bachi Medum Biju Donji She Dingor Yezo Ngeri Donja Jeju Jewadan Medo Nube Nanjava Dan Domba Junjin Bun Zon Zon Zoji Jashi De Jan Den Da De Le Yo. The fundamental ground is scented with incense and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha land and offer it. May all sentient beings enjoy this pure realm. Holy Lamas high, wrap the sky of your Dharma bodies in massive clouds of knowledge and love, and let them pour upon the earth of your disciples as we are ready, a shower of rain, the teachings deep and wide. Re I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious Guru. Yedam Guru Ratna Mandala Gam Niratayami. Yadan Zaji Janam La Yanju Badu Dani Yazuji Dagi Chunye Jibe Zonamji Rola Benji Zonye Rubayu Yadan Zaji Janam La Yanju Badu Dani Yazuji Dagi Chunye Jibe Zonamji Rola Benji Zonye Rubayu Jadan Zaji Janam La Janju Badu Dani Yasuji Dagi Chunye Jibe Zonamji Rola Benji Zonye Rubayu.
What the you think you want? I you think you want the Takade Pamugala, Rinata, Saji, Majita, and the Lucidajan, the Talons on the Singers at Marva, Landru, Pachishi, so on Devas, Sonji, the Chiwaku de Alamas, Moaji, Saji Jeti, Saji Marva.
So we are again looking at the Lama Tsongkhapa's text called The Source of All My Good, or sometimes translated The Foundation of All Good Qualities. So you'll find this in the book. It's on 39 in mine. So it's right around in the center section. You'll find the Tibetan font as well as the English translation. So that's where it is in the prayer book. And if we look at the commentaries on this, we'll find in Pabunka Rinpoche's commentary that this text is broken into 4 specific categories. First, how to rely upon the teacher that's a root of the path. Secondly, how students train their minds after they've taken on a Lama. And the third is a request so that you attain all favorable conditions for succeeding in the path and stop all circumstances that might prevent you from doing so. And then a prayer that in all your future lives you may be taken under the care of a Lama and gain the strength to reach the final end of the various levels or grounds and paths. So these are the 4 categories in Pabunka Rinpoche's commentary. So the first category of how to rely upon the teacher who is the root of the path is addressed in this first category, this first stanza rather. It says, the source of all my good, the source of all my good. The source of all my good is my kind Lama, my Lord. Bless me first to see that taking myself to him in the proper way is the very root of the path, and grant me then to serve and follow him with all my strength and reverence. So this is the first category.
다이들은 힘을 구와도 와단데 레고서 말이야. 레진이비 다이들한테 신도니까 전신시주네 니생고도 힘을 내불로 주시면 저신줄로 다이들한테 도와지는 줘봐줘도 어때도 거저로 신도니가 써야 되냐 봐가와 되네 전신시주네서 전쳐와 어때 니생고도 힘을 내불 주시면 봐줘 신지 로스다 다유 내다 녀봐가와도 저 이마데 니생고도 힘을 내불로 주시면 봐줘 신지로 다가데 다이들은 힘을 내불 구와스 라링 사지오들인도
So here, this next category of how students train their minds after having relied upon the path, we find under that category in the Lam Rim outline, we find two categories: the exhortation to take full advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity, and then how to take full advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity. And under that first section of the life of leisure and opportunity, we have the identification of leisure and opportunity, which then we find the 8 leisures and the 10 opportunities or 10 endowments. And then in the next points, we then find the difficulty of obtaining this life of leisure and opportunity, and then the value of this life, or the great meaning of this life of leisure and opportunity, or great value of it. So here we read within this stanza where it deals with those points I just made. Bless me first to realize that this excellent life of leisure I found just this once is ever so hard to find and ever so valuable. Grant me then to wish and never stop to wish that I could take its essence night and day. So we find dealing with the identification of leisure and opportunity, the difficulty of obtaining leisure and opportunity, and the great meaning of leisure and opportunity presented in this stanza.
다 예불한 중고들 중고도 동을 맞으려 불러줘 주다 인다 동을 맞으려 불러줘 주 집에 준비 맞으려 불러줘 주 손래 다 중고도 동을 맞으려 불러줘 주도 어때 내내 대고 보다 로수요와 주 주버지 니도 집이 저와 담바다 시제수 너도 담아지 가나 렌데 세수 나와라 나바 때문에는 예비수 자신 저와나 좀 뭐봐도 계속 살아두고 싶어라 다도 받는데 봐시로 어떻게 집을 중고도 동을 맞으려 땡고요 네 드류랑 다 장도 다 먹을 좀 주지 디발에 사다지야 아주 지시에 대해서 어떻게 땡고 서로
So then, in the second category of that outline just previously mentioned, which is how to take advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity, we then find 2 sections. We find 3 sections under the how to take advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity. We have training the mind in the stage of the path shared in common with beings of small capacity, training the mind in the stages of the path for beings of great capacity, and training the mind training the mind in the stages of the path shared in common with beings of small capacity, training the mind in the stages of the path shared in common with beings of medium capacity, and training the mind in the stages of the path for beings of great capacity. So then this first category of training the mind in the stages of the path shared in common with beings of small capacity, we find represented in this section here. My body and the life in it are fleeting as the bubbles in the sea froth of a wave. Bless me first thus to recall the death that will destroy me soon, and help me find sure knowledge that after I've died, the things I've done, the white or black, and what those deeds will bring to me, follow always close behind as certain as my shadow. Grant me then ever to be careful to stop the slightest wrongs of the many wrongs we do, and try to carry out instead each and every good of the many that we may. So that's the section that deals with the teachings shared in common with beings of small capacity, and these are teachings for beings who wish to engage in pathways to the higher realms of cyclic existence. So by engaging in practices of going for refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, engaging in ethical behavior which abandons the 10 non-virtuous activities, and then acknowledging one's downfalls, one is able to obtain the higher realm rebirth. And these are the teachings, or the pathways shared in common with beings of small capacity.
어제 다들 가서 그래 시 제수 르다 담아진 까나 레데 상들래 시 당아서 시우들 때는 매발에 말에 네 좋아지려고 좋아를 때로다가 이마도 제내요 말에서와 되니부터 나 까부가와다 나부디비 렐라테네 네와티 데부터 조용 그레스 나부디비 렐라테네 내 손송도 조야 만도와 까부기 렐라테네 던도 타바던 산지제 와도 수면도와 시제수 르던 터마제 까나레데 까부던 나부 까부스나 까부기레 르지 고아줄라서 버터서 말바 까부기레 고아주 데부들 던도다 와도 용그레스 말바 던도일라데 먹주모 수진다 자운도다 안디발 샤당시야 도스레데 말바 레제트와제나 네모도 추추도 와도 준드가 돌자고 와다
So this section that deals with my body and the life in it are fleeting as the bubbles in the sea froth of a wave. Bless me thus to recall the death that will destroy me soon, and help me find sure knowledge that after I have died, the things I've done, the white or black, and what those deeds will bring to me, follow always close behind, as certain as my shadow. Grant me then to ever be careful to stop the slightest wrongs of the many wrongs we do, and try to carry out instead each and every good of the many that we may. So here, when we are speaking of the pathways shared in common with beings of small capacity, those virtuous practices that we find within that capacity give rise to the higher realm rebirth. So the virtue gives rise to the higher realms of the gods and the humans. And when we read this, white or black, white is referring to our virtuous deeds, and black is referring to our non-virtuous deeds. So here we're finding the certainty of the fruition of karma. So if we engage in virtuous actions, or any among the 10 virtuous actions through our body, speech, and mind, then this results in the rebirth into the higher realms, into liberation, into omniscience. Black deeds, which are the non-virtuous deeds, give rise to the lower realm rebirth. So the 10 non-virtuous actions give rise to lower realm rebirths of the hell, hungry, ghost, and animal realms. So if one wishes to have a higher realm rebirth, and it is necessary to engage in the pathways which lead to the higher realms. So we find in this presentation the pathways which lead to the higher realms are those practices shared in common with beings of small capacity, such as going for refuge in the 3 jewels, engaging in ethical behavior which abandons the 10 non-virtuous activities, and acknowledging one's downfalls. And if we look at the section in Nagarjuna's Precious Garland, we find the 16 definite goodnesses. So we can also, that's an alternative to the enumeration of the 10 virtuous activities. We also can find the additional 6, making for a total of 16 definite goodnesses in Nagarjuna's text. Dixon?
Loja to ashin de bisu ten lo chida jare ma chi ten lo chida jare ma la tai ten la yebule bisu
Less.
yebule su ngo ni je yebule su ngo de la che bu chung da tung ngo la jare lo jam su da ni da tung ngo la jare lo jam su che bu chi bi la jare lo jam song go da na da na su de che bu chung da tung ngo la jare lo jam su ga do de ba de che bu chung da tung ngo la jare lo jam su de la samba jang ngo da Samba di jebi tse, telo lo tu se wa, song yo ba. Ta samba jang ngon de la, jiten shima tenye je lo jeba tang, jiten shima di tau ten bas. Jiten shima tenye je lo jeba tang, jiten shima di tau ten bas de la, jang du ta le de je de marbe. Jang du ta le de tu sun de ka du le wu wa, jang du. Jang du to wa de ka du le wu wa, le de ta ta ringa du le de ta ma shin marbe.
So then when we look at the outline of the Great Treatise on the Stage of the Path to Enlightenment, and we find they'll go back to those two categories, the exhortation to take full advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity, and then how to take full advantage of life of leisure and opportunity. And then we get into the section on how one takes advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity. We find again those points: training the mind, the stages of the past shared in common with beings of small capacity; training the mind, the stages of the past shared in common with beings of medium capacity; and training the mind, the stages of the path for beings of great capacity. So we're under the section now of training the mind, the stages of the past shared in common with beings of small capacity. And in the Lam Rim outline, we find the actual training of thought of a person of small capacity under that major heading. The measure of the training of thought, or the measure of the attitude of a person of small capacity, and then dispelling any misconceptions related to a person of small capacity. So under that first category of the actual training of thought of a person of small capacity, we find 2 points: developing a state of mind that strives diligently for the sake of future lives, and then secondly, relying on a method or a means for achieving happiness in one's next life. So then we're starting to get to the section where we are left off, and that is the method or means for achieving happiness in one's next life. So under that heading, we find 2 points: a refuge, and then karma and its results. So the refuge section has the points of cause of refuge. The Okay, so we've already, I was just asking if Rinpoche went over the 4. I didn't want to add something he didn't say, the 4 points, but we've gone over refuge, Rinpoche said. So now we're going to deal with the section on karma and its results. Less so. Less so. So today we're going to talk about karma and its results, because we're at the section that says the things I've done, the white or black, and what those deeds will bring to me follow always close behind, as certain as my shadow. So we're going to speak now about karma. So in Pabunka's Lamrim commentary, we on this Source of All My Good, we don't find a very large amount of information about karma and its results. Digare. Less so. Less so. Let's go. Lamrim Dago. That's Dago. Ale de Leje Shi. Shi Shedra, Leja Shi. Less so. Okay, Che. Less so. Nipa Sumba. Deyure. Bengarasar. Ben Sumba Nge Ragu. Le Sache. Tambo Shi Nipa Shedra. Lene? Rasar. Less so.
le sheba dang matriba le majiba dang matriba sheba chumizo jitigdu wata le shin
lesser. So when we look at the Great Treatise on the Stage of the Path to Enlightenment and how it deals with karma, when we look at the outline of it, we find the major heading of the outline, developing faith and conviction, that the faith of conviction, so that's the faith, developing faith of conviction. This should just be faith and conviction that is the root of temporary happiness and certain goodness. Developing faith and conviction in karma and its results. I'd have to look at the root text and go back and forth, but that's the point here. Developing the faith and conviction in karma and its results. So there are 3 points in the Lamrim outline that deal with it. First, reflecting on karma and its effects in general, and then reflecting on karma and its effects specifically, with specifics, or I don't know how they name it. I was just listening in the Tibetan. So reflecting on karma and effects in general, reflecting on the distinctions among the varieties of karma. So the second one, I see, reflecting on karma and effects in detail. So this word detail is specific. So the first is the word general in Tibetan. The second, the word is shedra, which is specifics. So first is the generalities of karma and its result, and then the second of the outline are the specifics related to karma and its results. And then the third part of the outline is how you engage in virtue and turn away from non-virtue after you've reflected on karma and its results in general and specifically, or in general and in detail, as they use in here with detail. Going back to the first point, which is the general karma, we'll find 4 categories listed. So the actual way in which you reflect on the general karma has 4 points. First is the certainty of karma. Second is the magnification of karma. Third is not experiencing effects you didn't do. And then the fourth is the actions that you have engaged in don't go away. Don't just go away. So when you engage in an action, it doesn't just go away. The actions you have done do not perish. So those are the 4 categories under the general points of karma and its results. Diksan.
College and over in the Marva. That laying about the Carasana, laying about the Tunda to what the Marva, laying about the Tunda to Carasana, Jugawa, Tanga to Lujigawa, Nagigawa, Ijigawa, Nugrovada, Lujigawa, Nagawa, Ijigawa to Debutele, Yaji Meji, and the Dawayunguris. The one end of this, the one Alamatu.
Let's so.
Le nga gwa le donge chigmaris le nga ge magwa le ji magwa nga ge magwa e ji magwa tu don jebete donge yungre madu dwa yung maris le ngeba so ge kana lende shijin tambala what the marbe so yung what the shit le ngeba
less so. So the first category of the generalities, or karma and its results in general, really specifically, karma and its results in general. The first category we have first the certainty of karma. The second, the magnification of karma. Third, not experiencing effects of actions you do not. The effects of actions that. Not experience the effects of actions that you do not do. And then the fourth category of the actions you have done do not go away, do not perish. So the first category of the certainty of karma is where we find, just left off in the source of all my good. So we find, help me to find sure knowledge that after I've died, the things I've done, the white or black, and what those deeds will bring to me follow always close behind, as certain as my shadow. So here, this is dealing with the certainty of karma. So here this is referring to the fact that when we engage in virtue through our body, speech, and mind, these actions will result in happiness. They will never result in suffering. So this is the certainty of the virtuous karma, that if we engage in it through our body, speech, and mind, it will give rise to happiness. It will not give rise to suffering. I might have messed that up before when I said it. So it will only give rise to happiness. It cannot give rise to suffering. I think I said it can't give rise to non-virtue before. So it can't give rise to suffering because non-virtue is what gives rise to suffering. When we look at non-virtue of the body, speech, and mind, the certainty is that it will give rise to the experience of suffering. It will never give rise to the experience of happiness. So therefore, this is what the certainty of karma category refers to, that virtuous deeds will necessarily lead to happiness and non-virtuous deeds will necessarily lead to suffering. Decent. Less so.
And then Nabagi later, Davidla, and then Dunge. What the Susu Negres laying habitudes. Nazun de Tana, and de Jagramatu, Conjumudua, Megotona, Mego Jagramatu, and the rice Jagamaro. Then Naji, Gay Davidle, Doa Yungramatu Dunga.
Lesser.
Magi Davidle, Dunga Yungramatu, Doa Yungaris. What in Pesantana and the Kalingan.
When we look at this word certainty of karma, it is certain that our virtuous deeds that are being referred to as white deeds in this case will give rise to happiness. Our non-virtuous deeds, being referred to as the black deeds, will always give rise to suffering. In the same way, if you plant rice, you will get rice. You will not get corn. If you plant mango, you will not get rice. You will get mango. So this is the certainty of that situation. And in regards to karma, we find the certainty of virtue giving rise to happiness, non-virtue giving rise to suffering. Less so.
And tree mountain, tree dominant,
Okay. Less so. So when we think of this, there has to be a seed present for the rice to grow. So there has to be a seed that's planted in order for the rice to grow. And it's specifically a rice seed that gives rise to the rice. And if we look at trees, for instance, there's many, many trees in a forest, and each of those individual trees had their individual seeds that caused many, many different seeds to cause a forest, and each tree had its own individual seed that caused it. So this is how we think of it in those terms.
What the days on Tanako Abngasuna, laying Hebas, Gay David Dawangeba, doing David doing about the Quachang with the Data, what to Santan Dabamar.
So then if we can think about the analogy of using this rice example, or this example of the rice, and we can understand this, then we can move that understanding very easily to the understanding of karma and its results, to understand that certainly virtuous deeds give rise to happiness, non-virtuous deeds give rise to suffering, or positive deeds, I think was stated, positive deeds give rise to happiness, and misdeeds misdeeds give rise to suffering, and this is a certainty.
Lepage was a Karasuas and a lepage was again the Pena, not to see Shinla Suba, and then Dela Suba Tasuki, Sunke, Debutatan, Nagi, Gay Letan, Magi Letan, Lomaten to the leg and Debutina, Debut Nagi, Nagi Debut Shida Page was. The Legis of Alatene, Debut Judge Watan, things of Mobishibu Mandra.
Then the sheen, so when chun Less
so. What then she 가서래 시인 저부터 페이처 말이스 나기 레 메기레 로마땡 레드 저부터 시작 페이처레스 레지 사발라테네 저 몬타모 저래 어떤 게 군내바용만 와
many. So this next section, dealing with the next section under the reflection on karma and its results in general, deals with the magnification of karma. And if we look at like an outer result, an outer result, for instance, if we look at a tree, when we or rice, when we plant one small seed, something very, very large grows from this one seed, and within the same within the rice. Likewise, when we engage in an action, that action is placed within our continuum in an inner. This is an inner way inside of us, or inner way, and then this small action then gives rise to a very big result. So this is the magnification of karma, that one small action gives rise to a very large result.
안 조선고 주제지바 지게는 성지 코아지네 샤자투비 받을래 안 자손 되고야 지금도 레 페이지 와서 되는 말봐 신라수바 되는 게 주는 되게 요즘 하는 거다
the tama shin shila sopa
신은 샤 요송도 신 단다 요서 시야무도다 신동 주의 아니 어디 세버세자게 로바담 로비 근유도서 친구 전라서 원년 주직 면도 답에 맥이 레라테네 주신 양고 전제 성지 고안지네 샤자도 마비죠 봐 자순되고 개발 어떤 날 회치워서도 저희가 말이야.
So when we look at this topic of the magnification of karma, we find the story we went over previously about the man who said negative things to the community of learners and non-learners. He called them 18 different names when they were engaging in a dialogue. And he called them 18 names of different animals, and as a result was born as a sea monster with 18 heads, and stayed that way from the time of Buddha Kashyapa all the way to Buddha Shakyamuni's time. So here, this is an example of the magnification of karma, where we find these names were called in 18 different names, and it resulted in many years as a monster with these 18 different heads. So one event resulted in a very long span of time staying as this sea creature. And this is an example of the magnification of karma. When we find that example of the tree that gets very large from its cause, then we also can apply that same understanding to karma, and we use this example to understand what the meaning of it is. Diksun. So this is what is stated about the magnification of karma.
달레 마제 받아 맞춰봐서 레 마제 받아 맞춰봐서 가서 와서나 기레 마사나 도와 용 말했어 도와도 제가 말했어 디바 마사나 디비 데브도가도 제가 말했어 레 마제 받아 맞춰봐서 어디서 말해.
The next category deals with not experiencing the effects of actions that you didn't do. So if you don't engage in the virtuous actions, you will not have happiness. So you will not experience that result. And if you don't engage in misdeeds, then you will not experience the result of suffering. So you won't have suffering. So this is the point that's being made here, is you won't experience the effects of some thing that you didn't engage in.
다 레셰바 추면서 봤어. 그와는 기레다 마기레 사사사네 냐부터 선고 샤다 제도네 아버마도 샤다 제마도 바이나 안고렌데 추저도 말에 제다 채용들레 데부터 조용으레스
Dixon.
다 기레다 마기레 사로와 Magile Shana Jigina, Anguilla Malasovato Suki, and Duganum was Rajinua.
Lesser.
What the Shana Jematubaina, and then what the Chuso Mares, Magile Sadu, Dungati Jimeji, no Gures. Niamato is on the Shana Jebainako, never so a Tashi Janua. Tenaji, Gile Sabaina, the Jabadawati about Yungure. Contra the Luda and Jubaina and Kakares. What the name is a marve?
The Tama, Contra Don Luta.
Contra the Luta Gawal no marve.
Oh, Sag
Contra the Luta Gawal, the watching you never know. No, is it? Niabutoja take DB Lel doing you never know.
Less so.
What the Jetubaina Abramatu, Chematubaina. And the leg got the Mago South Sadu, the water doing Yajibi no choose do matters.
Okay.
What this one is?
Lesser. So the fourth category is the actions that you accumulate will not perish. So here they won't go away. And here, if one engages in purification practice, such as the four opponent powers, they can be lessened and they can go away. But if there hasn't been an application of some sort of antidote or opponent to the negativity, then one will necessarily experience the results of, for instance, the accumulation of non-virtue, and that will be suffering. So the suffering will be the result of accumulation of non-virtue if there hasn't been a purification. If one applies the four opponent powers, then one can lessen it and then not experience the suffering. We find examples such as Angumala, who engaged in a lot of negativity and was able to get rid of that non-virtue through utilization of practicing and the four opponent powers. But if we do not purify these misdeeds, then they will certainly give rise to non-virtuous action. They won't go away. Sooner or later, they will give rise to a result of suffering. So, just like the four opponent powers harms non-virtue, hatred or anger and wrong view harms our root virtues. So we see how our root virtues can be abandoned through those antidotes, if you will, or those opponents, which are hatred and wrong view, and how the non-virtues can be eradicated or abandoned through utilizing the four opponent powers and practices. Decent.
Tagi Leni Saba in a contra Luta, Manu, Tajika, Gile Sa on Dule, and Chuba in a Chuba Buage, Conjo Sontan, Bugentan, and Buage, near Batacote. What to Sukingalo, 10 days in Devamat was on town. What in Huaja or Tanjibaina, contra the Luta, no two was about us.
So, but if a root virtue, such as making offerings, and then we find in offerings, there's two categories, offering of wealth and services, or goods and services. So if when we're, for instance, meditating on emptiness of the action, agent, and object, so the emptiness of the agent, the person making the offering itself, the action, which is the action, and then the object to which one is offering to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. If one is recognizing the emptiness of that and then dedicating it, then that, if it has been dedicated, then it can't be harmed by anger or wrong view. The root virtue doesn't get extinguished if it's been, if one is meditating on the emptiness of action, agent, and object and then dedicating it.
hotel jama hotel le ngeba sa ki le ndebu ta megi le ndebu ngegres
Lesser.
ki le ndebu doa yure ane dibi le ndebu doge yure so ngeba res marba le ngeba le pechewa ta nagi goa ta magawa ta Roma te goa te ndebu shira pech kures 안가 추진이야 고지 버자 말바 근데 신라서부터 저거 저부터 페이치부터 내요 말이스 레 페이치 왔어 나가도 페이치버에 시도 페이치 말이스 페이치와 레 마제 바다 맞춰봐 게다 머기 레 마사나 안 동에도 책 말이스 goa 마사나 더번저부터 왔다 책 말이스 레 마제 바다 맞춰봐 셰바 추면서 사사들래 안 대발샤나 제와드는 맞는 게지메지 용구르스 what they said.
So then we have these four categories related to karma and its result that we went over. First, the certainty of karma, recognizing that virtuous deeds certainly give rise to happiness, non-virtuous deeds certainly give rise to suffering. And then the second category of the magnification of karma, this inner magnification that takes place, that begins with a small deed and then gives rise to a very large result. And we don't find this magnification that takes place at this level in external things as great as we do related to these internal karmas. So it's something that's internal. So when we accumulate actions, be they virtuous, non-virtuous, or not presented in scripture, these magnify and become greater than the initial action inside of us. And then the third category, which is the not experiencing the actions that not experiencing the results of actions that you do not do, is saying if you do not engage in virtue, you will not experience happiness. If you do not engage in non-virtue, you will not experience suffering. And then the fourth category is that it won't go away. The actions you have done don't perish or don't go away unless they have been purified, for instance, by the four opponent powers. If one has not applied the four opponent powers, then they will certainly give rise to a result. So then these 4 points that are made related to the general way to reflect on karma and its results are found in this Lam Rim outline, and then we find it in other texts such as Pabonka Rinpoche's Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, and other texts which are Lam Rim commentaries.
Lende shi samba tang, shiratu samba tang, sanne judu sha chulos. Ta tambula ni lende shi samba tala ni. Shi samba ngun tang, susu chete samba ni je. Shi samba ngun tala le ngebi chu, le pechewa, le majiba tamate, le sheba shumezo, jidik pani jini yungudwa, tombo le ngebi chu yungudwa. Tombo le ngebi chu nes, ta le ngebi chu ngaso, gi le gendebo tang, megi le gendebo te, dewa tu tungente, susu ngegeres, ngani deshi jawsarwa, wata langri chemba tulundugis, le ngebi chu nes, le ngeba zeta karisagrisana, le ngebi chu ne, susu chu tang papa kan yin yang chua senbi naba jenji dawa ta na shenje nyewa jeba na long sewa dangba la ten ne jeba yin chi tang je ne hun gi le ji samba le jong gi me gi le dawa jong ne me la sa what the college of the Amino.
Lesser.
The thing you think
Lesser.
Jinda cut the machine on Kazan.
Data yin. Demba. So Rinpoche is saying we're going to use the Lamrim Chemo because if we utilize other sources, we won't be sure that we're going in the right order according to Tsongkhapa's wishes. So we're going to use this so that we have a very stable, steady way to look at the source. So we're going to then look at anybody has the Lamrim Chemo with them, we're on page 210. So we find developing the faith and conviction that in karma and its result. So the second part of the explanation is how to achieve happiness in the next life. Developing faith and conviction in karma and its effects consists of reflecting on karma and its effects in general. So then we find that the reflection of karma and its effects into general are divided into two categories. The first category is the actual way to reflect in general. And then the second is reflecting on the distinctions or the differences among the varieties of karma. So these are the 2 points that are made, beginning with the actual way to reflect on karma in general. So then we find the same categories we went over. We find the first, the certainty of karma. Second, the magnification of karma. Third, the not experiencing the effects of actions that you did not engage in. And then the fourth is the actions that you've done do not perish. So when we go on to that first category, the certainty of karma, this is the certainty that virtuous deeds give rise to happiness and non-virtuous deeds give rise to suffering. So then we're going to start under the certainty of karma section. All happiness in the sense of feelings of ease, whether of ordinary or noble beings, including even the slightest pleasures, such as the rising of a cool breeze for a being born in hell, arises from previously accumulated virtuous karma. It is impossible for happiness to arise from non-virtuous karma. So this is the first section that Rinpoche just read. Bigson.
There's one. Da lenge between Suzu Ju dan Papa Kanya, Suzu Ju dan Papa Ni Jago, Ni Jadule, Nasu Bing Ngalo, Yana Suzu Ju, Yana Papa Karum Charum Marbe. Bing. Aya Bing, Na Aya Bing. And Tona Tuba Jete Aya Bing Marbe. Tona Matubi, Kazak Ngalo, Suzu Ju Lode Marbe. Lama Tuba Suzu Ju and those Suzu Ju dan.
So here we need to understand well what is meant here. So it says all happiness in the sense of feelings of ease, whether of ordinary or noble beings. So here we're going to look at these two words, ordinary beings and noble beings. So if we divide persons, or kansak, persons, we find that if it is a person, it is necessarily among these two kinds of beings. So that persons are necessarily ordinary beings or superior beings. Ordinary beings are those beings who are not Aryas. So this word superior means Arya. And what that means is beings who are superiors or Aryas are beings who have reached the path of seeing or higher. So this qualifies them as an Arya or as a superior. Those beings who have not reached the path of seeing are ordinary beings. So we divide all persons into those two categories, ordinary beings and superior beings. Nyawapa DP. Okay.
Helping, then heart helping, core helping, Nimarba, heart helping,
Lesser.
Chance of no time to the Yumarda, and the good tour, the one with
The gay what?
the gain.
Okay. Nyawa DP Depo. The Sorwa gay Depo. They got the lesson.
Nyawaba Jetan doing more.
Lesser.
And Chance on the loan that the new Sabbath long time to Jim the Yumar.
Lesser.
What the tour Samba Nuasana, happy billion, could love.
Lesser. So then we find it says including even the slightest pleasures such as the rising of a cool breeze for a being born in hell. So here, this example, a hell being experiences a large amount of suffering. So they have large amounts of suffering, but every once in a while, they'll be able to be at ease, or they'll have a feeling of ease because a cool breeze will come. And that cool breeze is a result of virtue. So this hell being is an ordinary being categorically, and this experience of this happy feeling that they have is a result of their virtuous activities.
And the Dajumba le Unyuma la Zubi Dunga Yoris. What to look at Dibi Devoris?
Unyo, Sena?
Good now.
Go Nagadu, headache. Okay. So a foe destroyer, for instance, has headaches. So an arhat, an arhat or a foe destroyer can get a headache. And this headache is caused by non-virtue, misdeeds.
Suju da Papa Khan Yin, Soa Sembi Nabajenji, Suju Yin and Papa Yin and Soa Semba Yuma, Soa Doa Marva.
Less so.
What the Gawag David Lodore.
So,
Doa Tanji and Tana, Senjawa Jebanas, Yawa Tanil Jebana, Long Siva Lamba Les, Long. Nyawa Chanel hard injury.
Less so.
Long Tansan Tamara.
Less so.
Talatin the Wajiba usually.
Less so.
Jebaye, Tanjin and Gi Lake Sambale, Jungi, Maggie Lel, Nyaba what did the water, Maggie Lake the Marisata, Maggie Lele, the one you want the name, alas.
Less so. So here it says that all happiness in the sense of feelings of ease, whether of ordinary or noble beings. So whenever an ordinary or a superior being or noble being experiences a happy feeling, it is necessarily the result of virtuous activities. It says even, including even the slightest pleasures, such as the rising of a cool breeze for a being born in hell. So here this is referring to the hot hell. Rinpoche previously said there are cold hell realms and hot hell realms. This is categorically under the hot hell realm. And every once in a while, they'll experience a happy feeling in the form of a cool breeze that cools them off. And this is a result of virtuous activities. So this is necessarily a result of virtue because it is happiness. And virtue, happiness is certainly caused by virtue. So it says, arises from previously accumulated virtuous karma. It is impossible for happiness to arise from non-virtuous karma. So it's not possible for happiness, and it's given an example of happiness. It's not possible for happiness to rise from non-virtue. It has to arise from virtue. So any happy feeling experienced by ordinary beings or superior beings is necessarily a result of virtuous activities.
That's what Dongan Dongan. So Donu Napa Genji, Dongan Tana, Drajum Vigil Jebaye, Tanjine, when Magawa Saba Lenjongi, Gawale, Dongan Nemedos, what is it? Drajum Vigil, and then Twa Dongan, you are a sword Dongan Marva, Unhubalas, what is it? Budaya. What is it? When Tiba Sabin Drivers, Madu, Gay de Maris, Gawali Dungaji, Neo Maris, Canal and the Suzules.
And then it says all sufferings in the sense of painful feelings, or suffering feelings, literally, including even the slightest suffering occurring in the Arhat's mind stream, arise from previously accumulated non-virtuous karma. It is impossible for suffering to arise from virtuous karma. So then here it's saying that even, for instance, a headache or a pain in the head. It says Arhat's mind stream, but Rinpoche keeps going back to headache or a pain, because we're talking about feelings of suffering or painful feelings. So a headache, for instance, that headache in a foe destroyer that a foe destroyer is experiencing is a result of non-virtuous karma. It's not possible for it to have arisen from virtuous karma. So this is again the certainty of the non-virtuous karma giving rise to suffering, the certainty of virtuous karma giving rise to happiness. Rinpoche, Okay, we'll take a short break and then we'll. Let's go.
다들 소원도 가서 동네 내발라 동네지 동네 주 동네 차반 주지 송자가 말해 동네지 동네 주 동네 차반 주지 동네 다 동네 있는 동네지 동네 차 주 동네 차반 주지 동네 생이 봐마이 이제 줄이 주고는 요 있는지 말해
동영이 차. 네네, 가르쳐 그래.
동네지 동네 주 동네 차반 주지 동네 대발에 송자 말해 동네지 동네서 좋아도 와라 동네 동네 있는 좋아 동네 임 차스 도와 있는 좋아 도와 임 차스 차반 주지 동네다 아니 주 동네 많이 what's so 말해
Chabaduje dan
파신 도와데
Dungyo.
파신 대니 가도 때다 오늘 세부여
Okay.
타지는 잘 송을 파신 대니 가도 추추 반바람마다 대니 가도 때다 오늘
So Ju Dungyo dan Chabadu Juje Dungyo Mayan.
차반 주지 동네 많이 주 동네 많이 도와로다 되네 동네 이나 초 동네 미차 도와 있는 초 도와 미차선 디서 말봐
So when we look at the suffering and the truth of suffering, like the suffering itself, we can divide it into three categories: the suffering of change, and pervasive compounded suffering. So feelings of suffering are necessarily suffering. Feelings of happiness are necessarily happiness. So feelings of suffering are necessarily suffering of suffering. So if it is the suffering, it is necessarily the suffering of suffering. When we look at these other categories of the suffering of change and the pervasive compounded suffering, we don't categorize the pervasive compounded suffering as under the word suffering, because the word suffering, or sometimes pain, it's translated as, is necessarily a feeling of suffering. And the pervasive compounded suffering doesn't categorically fall under feeling. Rinpoche is saying that's good. So it doesn't necessarily fall under the category of suffering. The pain kind of suffering, which is necessarily a feeling of suffering. And then the suffering of change doesn't fall into the category of suffering because it's happiness that changes. So this first category, suffering of suffering, is the feeling of suffering that we're thinking of. All suffering is necessarily the suffering of suffering. Is the suffering of suffering. And Rinpoche said that these subtle points are made clear in the Prajnapar, the Gari Sabuldu, the Parshin Shito and Kabiyare. Okay, so in the Two Truths section of the Panchen Sunandrapa's general meaning of perfection, these points are made very clear. So I can then. These points are made very clear. So it's very similar to what we find in the Lam Rim Chemo. So I have a bunch to translate. That's Gurum Che. So when we look at these points about the certainty of karma, when we look at happiness, is necessarily a result of virtue. So virtue certainly gives rise to happiness, non-virtue certainly gives rise to suffering. Then we find the example of the hot hell being who experiences a feeling, a cool breeze, as a feeling of happiness. And we find that that feeling of happiness that the hell being experiences as a result of virtue. Non-virtue cannot cause that feeling of happiness that the hell being has. And when we look at the example of a foe destroyer who has a headache or has some kind of feeling of suffering, that feeling of suffering is arisen from non-virtuous activities and cannot arise from virtue. So we find those two examples to explain the certainty of karma, one about the hell being and the cool breeze and the happiness resulting from virtue, and then the other about the foe destroyer and the suffering of a headache or something like that came about from non-virtuous activities, and it's certain to be that. So the points that are made we just made about suffering, the suffering of change and pervasive compounded suffering, are in line with what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying when we look at that term suffering, and there's feelings of suffering, and the term happiness, feelings of happiness. It falls in line with what Lama Tsongkhapa is stating about the feelings of it, because that's what we're referring to when we say the suffering. We're talking about the feeling of suffering.
Giyin debu dawa, magi debu dunge, sonsa katu tala, tsuwa le jana kuduwa. Happy feeling ta, na happy tala. Jangon dule, wate pashin tutule, dunge ina, tsuwa dunge im chawsa yate, wanda su yisa te.
So when we look at this point that's made, that non-virtue, suffering is a result of non-virtue. Happiness is a result of virtue. We'll find these points that are made in here, and then we find the feelings of pain or suffering is suffering, and feelings of happiness is happiness. And then when we look at the Prajnaparamita text, the general meaning of perfection, we find that if it is suffering, it is a feeling of suffering. So we find these points made, and then it is in line with how Lama Tsongkhapa is presenting it related to feelings of suffering, because categorically in that section, that's how it is broken down, that it's suffering is a feeling of suffering. But in the general meaning of perfection, it says that if it is suffering, it is necessarily a feeling of suffering. So when we find this feeling of happiness caused by the virtue, not by non-virtue, feeling of suffering, it's very similar to this explanation that we find in the Prajnaparamita teachings.
Tejin ngandu tangje dos magwale dongen galo magi ndebres magwale dongen kun tejin ngandu tangje dos ngason tu galo magi ndebres gele delu tangje das gwale an jeb delu tangje da jewa gudu dwa da jewa gudu dwa chwa dwa injir ba
Lessa.
What the shitting no John
Lessa. The Rinchen Chewa. So from the so then we find a quote. Where does it say that virtuous deeds give rise to or cause happiness, and non-virtuous deeds cause suffering? And here we find a quote from Nagarjuna's Precious Garland, where he states that from non-virtues come all sufferings, and likewise all miserable realms, and from virtues come all happy realms, and the joys in all rebirths. So here, when we're speaking from non-virtues come all sufferings, we're speaking of the suffering feelings, so the certainty of non-virtue giving rise to suffering feelings, and likewise all the miserable realms. So the lower realms, of cyclic existence arise from non-virtue, and then from virtue comes all happy realms and the joys of in all rebirths. So joys here is referring to happy feelings. So the joys one has are the happy feelings one has, and here it's stating that virtue causes all the higher realms and the feelings of happiness that one has in them, those births. And I'm sorry, in the virtues, I just want to make sure I'm saying this right, translating it right. From virtues come all the happy realms. So from virtuous activities, the higher realms are experienced, and all the happy feelings in all rebirths that one has are a result of virtue. So all sufferings everywhere, including those of the lower realms, come from non-virtues, and all happy feelings and happy realms come from virtue. So that's the point that's made from Nagarjuna's precious garland.
What does regent wale magawale dunga tejin ando tanje do gele dunu tanje tejin jogun do tas je son sos somba jusen ti chenas jusen ti chena ta jel me yaja jeba je humbe ti cher doa ta dunga nanas doa ta dunga nane doa ta dunga nane je me pas les gens attends je me pas les gens mares ane tout dans on joue la sobale me tumbi je les gens ya mais pas megi leje megi lejele dudu chetan ane dudu ki chaba hatu na ja le ni ji cheba hatu le jose jan ma cheba sosun jong yu le ne ba jen na molo nge ba nye ba ne na ba san je ba tang je yang tabi tawa sheba kabi chu gunje jing hasus changdu de le ni dele taji so ishi ji te ba sa de marba
Less so.
what tabi ju gwal de ju wa da to su ngol ya bu nge shi ne ba de ishi ki te ba marba ishi te ba what dele taji so res what the son marba
Yanda dawa, the yandapi dawa kakare.
jiten be ya tabi to se
Jikdembi yandapi dawa. Okay. Okay. So then Lama Tsongkhapa will then go on to explain Nagarjuna's quote. So Rinpoche read Nagarjuna's quote again. The precious garland states, "From non-virtues come all sufferings, and likewise all miserable realms. And from virtues come all happy realms, and the joys in all rebirths. Consequently, happiness and suffering do not occur in the absence of causes, nor do they arise from incompatible causes, such as a divine creator or primal essence, non-concordant causes. So it doesn't arise from causeless or non-concordant causes, and then there's an example of a non-concordant cause, such as a divine creator or a primal essence, the primal ooze it's usually translated as. And this is referring, anyway. Rather, happiness and suffering in general come from virtuous and non-virtuous karma, and the various particular happiness and sufferings arise individually, without even the slightest confusion, from various particular instances of these two kinds of karma, virtuous and non-virtuous. Attaining certain knowledge of the definiteness or the non-deceptiveness of karma and its effects is called the correct viewpoint for all Buddhists, and is praised as the foundation of all virtue. And I asked Rinpoche, here this word in the Tibetan, this correct view, is the same correct view that's used for emptiness, the word. So I asked him, because I see the word for emptiness in the Tibetan, and he said that this is a worldly correct view. And that is beyond, when we look at the word, that term, there's two categories. One's worldly and one's not. The correct view that's not is the one that's related to emptiness, and the worldly is related to this viewpoint. So this correct viewpoint for all Buddhists, meaning that karma and its results are certain.
도와도 동에 주면에 집에 있어 라바이나 안은 사지가 도주래 도와도 동에 여봤다 안은 도와도 동에 좀 먹어 배시 주면나 안은 사지 주를 매 주세요 말보다
So the Talmud Sanjay Ju guy?
도와도 동에
So this so
도와도 동에 신지 타막 주를 요하듯 줄 먹어 배시 그 도와도 동에 용하라 좀 먹어 배시 좀 먹어는 가게 주를 요주다 사지가 주래 동에 요하듯 동에 요발 좀 먹어 배시 what 타는 거보다 유멜 지와 말해서
Ale Sanjay Ju doing okay. So here first it says that happiness and suffering do not occur in the absence of causes. So we don't say that the Buddha is causeless. We don't say that if we were to say that it's causeless, then it wouldn't matter. Virtue wouldn't give rise to the Buddhahood, or non-virtue wouldn't give rise to the opposite. It could give rise to it if it wasn't. If there wasn't it says that happiness and suffering do not occur in the absence of causes. So neither happiness nor suffering are causeless. If they were, then they wouldn't have. Then it wouldn't. Happiness wouldn't come from virtue, and suffering wouldn't come from non-virtue. Then the Yanja it's
알렌드는 나라와
it's not a sabolasan.
도와도 동에들 주요레스
Lesser.
유비 줄이 제바레스
Lesser.
유비 젠리 제바레스
Lesser.
유바탄 줄이가 저래가 말 마다비 젠리 제바레스 주도 마다바 이후레스 마다바 임바탄제 네 대줄에 도마레 튜비첸스
Lo ale tapa mitapa jing too much. That's a.
근데 신동들 요구로다 유바탄제 신동 줄에 도마로 그 신동 줄도 마다바고 마다바면 그지 들 제가 말보다 신동 줄에 신동도 튜버지고 신마임이 사변지 떠는 신지가 말고 조마임이 사변던 조직음도 튜비신에서 보다 말이야.
So it says that they do not occur in the absence of causes. So they don't come about causelessly, happiness and suffering, nor do they arise from non-concordant causes. So here, when we look at things that exist that are caused, existence that are caused have to possess impermanence. So there have to be these existence that are caused first to qualify them as being caused or being a result have to be impermanent. Something that is so here this is concordant. So we find they have to be impermanent in order to give rise to something. Or to cause something has to be impermanent. For something to be a result, it has to be impermanent. So that makes it that one category relative to the concordant results. So it has to be concordant. Like if you plant a tree results. If you can't get something else to result other than a tree. So it has to be concordant with its cause. So it has to be a tree's cause in order for it to produce a tree. Non-tree's cause can't produce a tree. So this is what meaning of concordant is in this case. And so it can't come from something that's not concordant. So happiness arises from virtue, suffering arises from non-virtue. So we find that first it's not causeless, and secondly, when it arises with something causing it that's concordant with it. That's the best way to say it.
다 도와도 동에데 힌두 속에 시발 제바레스 시발 제바레스 단제바 조시 조를 제바레스 당아도 예수바 속에 가르고 조르스 라고 말베 가르고 조르스 라고 예수바
Okay.
예수바 가르 what
so here, then this example of a non-concordant cause is given. So it says, such as a divine creator or primal ooze or primal essence. So this is referring to a couple of traditions. Shiva, in the Hindu tradition, is a creator god. So this is stating that's not a concordant cause that could give rise to happiness or suffering. And then the primal ooze or the primal essence is referring to the Samkhya school's position. The enumerators, they state that all things arise from this primal ooze, this first ooze, in the Sankhya tradition. But when we look at the Christian tradition also, we find a divine creator, or a creator God. So this is what this is referring to here. It's speaking to those points.
And to the water doing it, you mebal chigmaris.
Causeless.
And one sugar chigmaris, Jimmy by the one sugar, Dali chigmare, Jen chigmare, Nikal chigmare, and then Dali my Jen me, Nili my Jimmy, Mobukanda Kana, Joanna Human, so I shall go to Marva. So I shall go to the Ngopana, the water doing it to the Dali Jiba Mai, Jen Jiba Mare, Nikal.
So we find 2 points that are made. First in Chenrezig's entrance to the middle way. Tambo, Umajuba. Okay, so first in Chenrezig's entrance to the middle way, we find things do not arise causelessly nor from a divine creator such as Shiva. So here we find this in the Madhyamika Avatara. And then in Nagarjuna's Mulya Madhyamika Karika, the root wisdom text, we find the quote that things do not arise from themselves, other, from a combination of both, or causelessly. So then we find these 2 points that are made. First in the Madhyamika Avatara that states that things do not arise causelessly nor from a divine creator such as Shiva. And then the point from the Mulya Madhyamika Karika that says that things do not arise from self, other, a combination of both, or causelessly.
That the water doing it to onshore chigmaris, China Matimical Chenrezig, and then data on the coin chivanabaris, Matimical chigmare, onshore chigmaris, onshore chigmare, and then Karasure. Allah got to chigmaris long.
The John Chen.
Transeng Dal, Transeng Shitsu,
yeah.
Lesser.
Lesser, Shitsu. Okay, I know what that is. So then we look at the positions, for instance, how that others hold about how things arise. So we can't say that these things arise from Shiva because that is not causally concordant. So that's what is meant. So if we look at results, they have to be concordant with their causes. And if we look at these, we can't say that they are causally concordant they are not concordant. These things are not concordant with Shiva being the cause. So this is why that is negated. And then the Samkhya school states that all things arise from this primordial ooze, this essence of some sort. And then this is negated because that's not concordant with the result. So then these are the points that are being made here and what is specifically being negated in these cases.
What the
So if you can understand this point, you can understand everything, because there's a large amount of points that are within this in the Pramanavartika Karika, the Dharmakirti's commentary on the Compendium of Valid Cognition. Very similar to what's being stated in that text. This goes to the Tambu Matumba the Yanjersuna then Lessa.
The water doing church is Lausuna, the water doing church
Lessa.
And
not.
She told I may. Jumel Mai. Jumel Chegmaris. Jumel Jenathan, Samagul didn't do of Tanagre. Samagul doing of Tanagre. Doing it on the way about a Jum would be aged. What is a roa? 다도요 보면 봐주로스 나대로 나대 다드네 대화도 등에 주 슈투를 제바 마이데 마티비줄을 메제베시 슈투를 제바 슈투스 타제바게 슈투스 시샤다 어때 슈투되게 죽가로 슈투 드바레스 슈투를 제바레스 근데 뭐시 도소나 슈투게 와드 드바 통소나 슈투도 못사네 드바가 되는 거지 버렸다
like Mushe Yuna, then Shitsu, then Musagdu. Okay. Shame. Okay. So when we look at this in a debate format, so we would say the subjects, suffering and happiness do not arise causelessly. Because if they arise causelessly, then any cause could produce happiness, and any cause could produce any cause could produce happiness, any cause could produce suffering. So if they didn't have a specific cause, then anything could make anything happen. Then looser, but that's the meaning of what is exactly of what is being said. Anything could make anything happen if that was the case, but that's not the case. So the subject suffering and happiness are not uncaused, because then there wouldn't be any difference between what makes happiness happy and suffering happy. There wouldn't be any kind of differentiation between that. The subject suffering and happiness is not caused by a primal ooze, because that primal ooze is not concordant with the result. And the primal ooze, so the Samkhya tradition, the enumerators, state that there is this primal ooze that gives rise to all phenomena. And then once the being achieves a state of clairvoyance, he or she recognizes this and then becomes embarrassed to know that this is what's making everything happen. And this embarrassment that is a result of the clairvoyance causes them to become liberated. So this is, according to the enumerators of the Samkhya tradition, is that they get clairvoyance, and then they're able to see that this primal ooze is what's making everything happen, and then they're embarrassed, and this embarrassment gives rise to their awakening. So this is what the Samkhya tradition states. But Buddhists state that the feeling of happiness and suffering cannot be caused by this primal ooze, because it's not concordant with the result. And then the same can be said for Shiva. The subject happiness and suffering is not caused by Shiva, because Shiva is not causally concordant with the result. Dixon.
다 힌두스고 어때 시바 주버서 시바 세주버서나.
So then the Hindus state that Shiva makes everything. Then we have to ask, who makes Shiva? And then there's a lot of doubts that suddenly arise. Then the Christians say that God created everything. Who created God? Then many doubts arise. So these doubts. Dopa dang tetsum puke chipa? Okay, so it's okay. I just wanted to make sure that this word dopa, and tetsum are both, I use the word doubt, and I wanted to make sure that that was accurate, if there was a little nuance difference that I needed to use. Nika Yemba, the Mwampa, Jane. Okay, Jane. Okay.
Jane.
Okay. So then when we look at this state, this quote from Moya Madhyamika Karika, things do not arise from self. This is a negation of the Samkhya school view, that there's this primal ooze that gives rise to everything. So this things arising from self, things do not arise from self, negates the Samkhya view. Things do not arise from other, negates all of the Buddhist tenet systems below Prasangika. So the middle way autonomy school, the mind-only school, the sutra school, and the great exposition school hold that things arise in some way from other. So this not arising from other negates everything from the autonomy school on down through the tenet systems. Things do not arise from both negates the view of the Jain tradition that say that these two things come, that self and other give rise to this. And then causeless negates the view of the nihilist tradition that states that things that are not caused by anything. Then the Nika Yimba Ranjupa Yomaribe.
Rajuba the Nika Licheva, Rajuba the Jain Licheva killing.
Ale.
Ranga Jutan Debugal, Ranga Sini to Paris. Ranga Sini to be Jain Le, Ranga Sini to be Division, Chiba Killan, Jain Lichevas.
So established by its own range. So the middle way, I was just asking, the middle way autonomy school states that things are created by other. And then Rinpoche gave a definition, wrong? Things are created from outside of or produced outside of one's nature, or something to that effect. I can get the exact definition of it. Things are produced outside of the nature, or things arise outside of one's nature. So one's nature referring to self. So this is the assertion of the autonomy school. I'll probably find it right here. Did decent. Existing by way of its, that exists by way of its own character. Hold on. I'll find it later. I don't want to hold the teaching up. Decent. So the may like so the question, Rinpoche is asking a question. Are human beings are born from their mother and father? Not born from a field. You know what I mean? So when we think along a lot about this, then it's very similar to what the points that are being made here. That human beings are born from their mother and father. They're not born from a field. So you start to think about this cause and effect relationship. So then this is a concordant cause. So when we look at these arisals, they have to be concordant causes. Oh, I'm sorry. If a human would give rise from a field, this would be not a concordant causes. They have to be concordant causes. I missed one part in there. So there's a lot of debate that goes on. So sometimes they say, human beings are born from a field. Like so this is a statement that's made when people are debating a lot. Are human beings born from a field? And everyone laughs. So this explanation, and you look at it, a lot of doubts arise related to this information, like doubts or questioning more information, if you will. So when we look at happiness and suffering, happiness and suffering are caused by misdeeds, or happiness and suffering are caused by virtue and misdeeds. So then we go over to here and we find, what are some other options? Well, if they were born causelessly, if there was no cause, then everything would produce everything. There would always be everything at all times. Happiness and suffering would always be. If there weren't any kind of separations, they would just always be at all times. Happiness and suffering would always be. So that's a way to negate the causelessness, because that's not the case. And then so then it says human happiness and suffering do not occur from Shiva, because human beings don't occur from a field. So you can use that as a way to express a way to negate that, to express the negation. You can say that no, human beings aren't born from a field, and then that speaks to the concordant. And then one has to say, okay, that's not concordant, and then you end up as a consequence with the concordant. Just making a note, 3 words of a note there. A consequence is that it's concordant. So when we look at this, we say the subject of happiness and suffering do not occur causelessly. They do not occur with something that's not concordant, such as Shiva creating it, or some primordial ooze creating it, because those things are not concordant. So they have to be concordant, and they have to be caused, and then the causes have to be concordant. So the Nalanda scholars, when they were speaking about the different non-Buddhist religious traditions, wouldn't think that there is probably the Christian tradition expressed in in those texts. So they're not using the example of the Christian tradition in the categories of non-Buddhist, negating the non-Buddhist traditions.
What does it do? That is generally what the Jugawal and the Dibale, Dugan Jumade, and the recent one, Magawal, Dugan, Nandu Tanjeto, Gillet into Tanjeta, Joagun to the Wata, Jason Kundo, the gentle one.
The happiness and all. So then, going back now to Nagarjuna's Precious Garland, which summarizes this, we see from non-virtues come all sufferings, and likewise all lower realms or miserable realms. From virtues come all higher realms or happy realms, and the happiness in all of those rebirths, or the joys in all of those rebirths.
What the Nagarjuna the Sumba is on teacher, the what not doing now, ne? Jumebali Juan Mares, two Lichiba Mares, one Shula Subas, Tawanshu Shiba Marbe, Sudan Nolulte, and then what in the mobile
Less of.
And then Sambala Suba to
Less of.
Suba Matumbi, Jule, and then Shitu Lichiba in a Matubi Julchere, one Shul Jesuna, Matubi Julchere, Dal Jesuna. Matubi Juli Chegre, Matubi Juli and the Bajo Maris, Matubi Juli Shua, Matubi Juli Shua Yan, Maple Rasa, Tibi Juli Shua Matu, Matubi Juli Shua Maris, Gemegi Le, Chele, Dudu Chetans, Gile Chele, and the Wache. magi le jele dunga chichigres dedo ki chaba na tuba na jans le ni chaba na tu magi le na tuba le dunga na tuba chigre gi le na tuba le ne doa na tuba chigres.
That's so. So here, then Lama Tsongkhapa comments on Nagarjuna's quote and says, consequently, happiness and suffering do not occur in the absence of causes. So happiness and suffering feelings are not causeless, nor do they arise from a divine creator or primal essence that is not concordant. So here the divine creators speaking to, for instance, Shiva. There's many other gods such as Brahma and so forth in the tradition. And then primal essence referring to the primordial ooze, or I guess it's also called primal essence according to the Samkhya tradition, or the enumerators. It says, rather, happiness and suffering in general come from virtuous and non-virtuous karma. And the various particular happinesses and sufferings arise individually without even the slightest confusion from various particular instances of these two kinds of karma. So this is showing that it is definite that happiness and suffering comes about from virtuous karma and non-virtuous karma. So there are these two kinds that give rise to these experiences. So there's a certainty of these two kinds of karma and certainty of what they produce.
Jugawa and Rebugawa and Natubal and Rebuta Chibati Abangazuna, what the Jitembe what it is.
So then if you understand very well that virtue is what causes happiness, non-virtue is what causes suffering, then you have attaining certain knowledge of definiteness and non-deceptiveness of karma and its effects is called the correct viewpoint for all Buddhists and is praised as the foundation of all virtue. So the correct worldly viewpoint. So, and this only didn't make it so it's not correct view, so it's not confused. So that word worldly is just in parentheses Rinpoche is using to explain what kind of correct view it is.
Gabi Chutanji Jinghans, Gabi Chutanji. Tetabi Le Gawal and Rebu Dawatan and Le Magawale, Debu Dungan, Town Dalatena Magna Maruta, Town Dalatena Abangazuna, what the Gabi Chutanji Jins, Gabi Chutanji Jimbata, Gawataji Jimbata, what the town was.
Jisana?
Jisana Kumadenda.
Oh, okay.
Talatene, Gabi Chukanga.
So here we have to create a correct reason to establish why this is what it is. So without establishing a reason, then you don't have a stable understanding. By establishing this thing, the idea that virtue gives rise to happiness, non-virtue gives rise to suffering, by establishing this premise with a correct reason or a sign, then it becomes a very stable understanding of this. So you just as a note, these are signs. It's not causeless. It's not created by Shiva. These are correct signs. Dayanda. Decent. So this is the certainty. So today we went over the certainty of karma, and then we're going to go around this again, and we're going to then get into the other points, the magnification of karma, the not experiencing the effects of actions that you do not do, and then the certainty of arisal, that the actions you have done do not perish. So these are the four categories related to karma, and we've gone over certainty, and we'll go over in more detail the other points later. Decent. Anyone has a question? Yes. That's.
If suffering caused by...
Hold on one sec. We're going to get it on...
Thank you. If suffering is caused by non-virtue and happiness is caused by virtue, what about the example of a dog is going to attack a child, but the parent steps in front of the animal that's going to attack the child and, kicks and fight off the animal and is injured, protecting the child. So they've done a virtuous action, but they're suffering with their injuries. And maybe their injuries are sustained. I mean,
Who's suffering? The person who beats the animal, or
the
animal?
parent that did the virtuous action to protect the child.
So the premise is that it's a virtuous action.
Yeah, I'm hoping that a
Hitting
mother...
the dog.
Well, yeah, to hit the dog so it wouldn't bite the child.
Okay, so the injury that's sustained by the parent, so why do they get hurt if they do something good? Is that the question? Why does the parent get some sort of suffering?
Is it always necessarily that suffering is always born of a negative action or a bad... Well,
I think I have it. We'll see if we end up with the answer with what I think that you're asking. So, Rinpoche, the gewa dewa ju, mi gewa dungyang ju, and kolin triwa de sansan the pama the pugo shamba yure, then dundru chishina ki lena, then the ki chishina the pugo sujagare, then the pama the ki that's nudu. Then kongi sampa the gewa gangen sena kon the pugo shamba yure. Then gar shene the sansan the pugo robachena the pama the ki the pama sujagadu. The pama the gewa sa gar shene sujason. The kongi trewa.
가난 데만이 가난 데밀레는 지지스. 보고
The kakare.
주변을 잡아요로
Lesson.
그거로. 칠동마드 디바 이제로.
Then the kongi trewa the gar shene the pama pugo robachena chik shena the ki pama sujagare. This suja jugare gangisene kon gewatsason then kon gar shene sujason.
수자게 주택 하망하만에 이제로다. 생각 디바사자베 네바지네 이제로다. 보고를 샴바지야데 그 내가 그와로다. 딘데버진 조지로.
Okay, so all of these things that are occurring are different things happening. So you gave the example of the parents have love and compassion for the child and then hit it or shoo it away some way, and then this is an act of love, so this is virtue. But the dog might bite the parent who's doing this, and how could he or she be bit if he or she is doing something virtuous? Is that the point? So this all breaks down into multiple categories. So first of all, the love and compassion that the parent has for his or her child is virtue, and will give rise later to a form of happiness. Not immediately, but will later give rise to a form of happiness. The beating of the dog is non-virtue. That will give rise to suffering in the future. So you have a positive thing happening, the compassion. You have the hitting happening, which is not positive, which is non-virtue. So you have a virtue being created that gives rise to happiness later. You have a non-virtue being created that gives rise to suffering later. And then the bite that occurs is from a previous unrelated karma in a previous life that's not related to the action that one is engaging in at that time. All of these instances are separate and aren't related in a sequential way. It's something good that happens, then you have happiness. This is the sufferings from a previous karma created in previous lives. The virtue will create happiness later, and the non-virtue will create suffering later. So that's how that scenario breaks down relative to karma. Does that answer your question? It's a very good question, Rinpoche said.
I'll think on the answer, but yeah, it's helping.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you do something virtuous, that next thing isn't happiness necessarily. It might be in 100 years.
It's not always...
Or it might be 100 lifetimes later.
It's not sequential or linear. It could be some other cause.
Yeah, the three kinds of karma. Karma that arises in this life, karma that arises in next life, and karma that arises in many future lives. So every action has that potential depending on what kind of action it is.
What happened in this summer?
Katie True.
Oh, Katie Joyous.
Thank you, Rinpoche. I just had one question to clarify. Rinpoche taught one time about individual karma
Okay.
and collective karma.
Uh-huh.
Do the members of the Chenrezig Center have a unified collective karma? That's my question.
Okay. The lay, the ewa sansan ni, the susur lay, then so the may the ngatsu nyamdu the lay mingare ngecheson the puke. Chittung. Then the susur lay the ngatsu chenrezig chutsu chittung lay ngatsu kanga nyamdu the lay drapu du sasoe the kongi triwa gangisena ngatsu kanga the chenrezig chutsu la de du ngatsu nyamdu yire then the lay gare
다 가서 전도 주지 시지 내지지대로 지둥이래 넘어래대. 그냥도 레 사바 인상 마오반데부터 조용했어.
So this could be an example of a collective karma where we have created similar, and I just don't want to mistranslate that. We haven't all done the same exact thing, but we've created similar causes for us to be able to, as a collective, as a group, be here together. So we've created similar causes and conditions for us to be able to be here together.
전라와의 레시브 저부터나 니든 주스 레가를 사요 바이나 마오반 데부터 남을 좋은 거였어.
So whatever karma you accumulate, later it will give rise to a result, for certain. So later it will give rise to a result. And then going back, in this case, there's similar karmas that are created that give rise to this result. This is a very good question. So it's 9. Do you have a question, Stasha? You just...
Yeah.
I'm sorry, thank you. I've heard in the past, and I can't remember from where, if someone develops, let's say, a terminal illness like cancer, per se, that it's supposed to make your next life or ease your suffering in the future. I didn't know if that worked both ways. The terminal illness that you get is a result of your past karma, your past suffering, your past non-virtue, and it will also lessen your future suffering?
Okay, the beche kagi hago mari yene ama loson the cancer yuna the jewa shema the dibile the dets kadu ganginsena the dugnel yure
kenji ta mama devasashe debu tronu gojero te tanu gojero.
So it's true that if you, for instance, get cancer, that you extinguish the previously created causes that gave rise to the cancer. When the cancer's done, what gave rise to that cancer is extinguished. It's exhausted. So in that sense, it does lessen your future suffering because you've extinguished some potential for it. But that cancer is caused by previous non-virtue.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll do the concluding mandala offering and dedication prayer. And thank you very much, everyone. The fundamental ground is scented with incense and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha land and offer it. May all sentient beings enjoy this pure realm. I dedicate whatever virtues I have collected for the benefit of the teachings and of all sentient beings, and in particular for the essential teachings for Venerable Asantrapa to shine forever. I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious Guru. I dedicate all this virtue to emulate the knowledge of the hero Yushri and likewise Samantabhadra as well. With whatever dedication is praised as supreme by all the conquerors who traverse the 3 times, I also dedicate all my roots of virtue for the sake of auspicious deeds. In that pure land surrounded by snowy mountains, you are the source of all benefit and happiness. Avalokiteshvara, Tenzin Gyatso, may you stay until samsara's end. I pray for the long life of the precious Khensur Wandok, upholder of scriptural and realizational doctrines, spiritual friend who trained extensively in the 5 great texts with exceptional wisdom and perseverance. Tuji Rimche, Gutsi Shapi Denrona.
tuji
That's a Lamrim Shemo Kanga Chirona.
야 야. 나는 좀